So the parable, he asked me to speak about a parable. I thought 67 parables. But this one jumped out at me when I looked at it. And it's the parable of the great banquet. Start by reflecting on what Danny said last week. So when Danny closed his preach last week, he closed with the description of the resurrection that's given in Matthew 28. And the final verses caught my attention in the Message translation of the Bible, which is the one that I use. So this is Matthew 28, verse 16 onwards, which says this: Meanwhile, the 11 disciples were on their way to Galilee, headed for the mountain that Jesus had set for their reunion. The moment they saw him, they worshipped him. Some, though, held back, not sure about worship, about risking themselves totally. And other translations say that they doubted. Jesus, undeterred, went right ahead and gave his charge. He then commissioned his disciples to preach the gospel and made the promise that Danny finished on. I will be with you as you do this, day after day after day, right up to the end of the age. And it struck me when I read it that some disciples held back, that they had witnessed and been in the presence of the resurrected Jesus, yet they were still unsure about worshipping him, about risking themselves totally and surrendering completely to his will. And this tied in with this parable that I felt that God was prodding me to talk about today. And I'm just going to read it from the Message version, but it's in Luke 14, from 15 to 24. And just to give some context, so the verses preceding this are where Jesus is having a Sabbath meal with the Pharisees, and he challenges them not to only invite those who can invite them back, but to invite those who will never be able to repay the favour. So Luke 14:15. That triggered a response from one of the guests. How fortunate the one who gets to eat dinner in God's kingdom. Jesus followed up, yes, for there was once a man who threw a great dinner party and invited many. When it was time for dinner, he sent to the invited guests, saying, come on in, the food is on the table. Then they all began to beg off, one after another, making excuses. The first said, I bought a piece of property and I need to look it over. Send my regrets. Another said, I just bought 5 teams of oxen and I really need to check them out. Send my regrets. And another said, I just got married and I need to get home to my wife. The servant went back and told the master what had happened. He was outraged and told the servants, quickly, get out into the city streets and alleys. Collect all who look like they need a square meal, all the misfits and homeless and wretched you can lay your hands on, and bring them here. The servant reported back, Master, I did what you commanded, and there's still room. The master said, then go into the country roads. Whoever you find, drag them in. I want my house full. Let me tell you, not one of those originally invited is going to get so much as a bite at my dinner party. So we're just going to look at this in stages. In the parable, the man's guests were all too happy to accept the invitation to the banquet. But when the time came to actually attend, they found excuses. And when I researched this a bit, these would have been ridiculous excuses. Who buys land without viewing it first? What is the urgency to look at the oxen? And when he accepted the invitation, he would know that he had a new wife. One needed to check on land, which was property. One needed to check over the oxen, his possessions, and one needed to get back to his new family. And next we'll consider, what does it mean to be a guest at a dinner party? What does it involve? Guests are waited on and served. The host wants to spend time with the guests. They are honoured to be there. There's conversation and laughter, togetherness. A sense of importance is placed upon being in each other's company. And so when I was reflecting on what this means to us, I think the message to us today, wrapped up in this parable, and there's probably lots of other things that you could take from this, but just in this 10 minutes, that we are his invited guests, his chosen ones. That as Christians, we have already accepted that invitation to follow him. But he wants us to be with him, to engage with him, to communicate with him, to receive from him. He wants to lavish us with his love and his gifts and to step into the fullness of life that he has prepared for us. But too often we are too busy to turn up to the banquet, to savour all that he has prepared for us. Too busy with our lives and our jobs and our homes and our possessions and even our families, that we forget to place that importance on simply being in each other's company. And I am guilty of this. And maybe I'm just talking to me this morning and everybody else has a nice balance. But the more of this parable for me is this, that if we are too busy for the banquet, he will simply invite someone else. Someone who isn't too busy. Someone who also needs their hunger satisfied by a saviour. It is us who will miss out on the blessing. But Jesus doesn't need us. He invites us and he wills us to come, but we ultimately have the choice as to whether we will pick up our crosses and follow him wholeheartedly, undoubtedly, or whether we are too busy to show up, unsure about risking ourselves total, unsure about wholehearted worship. And the verses following this parable, in this sort of sandwich of parables, are titled Figure the Cost. Anyone who comes to me but refuses to let go of father, mother, spouse, children, brothers, sisters, yes, even one's own self, be my disciple. Anyone who won't shoulder his own cross and follow behind me can't be a disciple. And God has blessed us with families and responsibilities and homes, and we must steward well what he has given us. But these things must not take precedence over him, first and foremost in our lives. And I was challenged when studying this, something that I'd heard in a sermon a long time ago, and I can't remember where it was. But sometimes, maybe we want just enough of Jesus to get into heaven, but not enough for the reality of walking with him to impact our everyday lives. Not one of those originally invited to the dinner party will get a bite. Is this they weren't truly disciples in the first place? But this parable concludes with a message of hope. It speaks of God's great compassion and his desire to see his house full. 1 Timothy 2 verse 4, he wants everyone to be saved and to come to knowledge of the truth. He has gone to prepare a place for us, but he also daily invites us to come and be with him. He promised to be with us day after day after day, right up to the end of the age. So will we make the decision to set aside our busyness and to show up to the banquet today and tomorrow and for all the days until he returns? And that's probably another sermon series in itself of how we actually do that, how we practically do that in our lives. And I just want to finish with this that I heard years ago, and I just found it again yesterday. It's by Paul Hawken, who was an environmentalist, or is an environmentalist. And he says this: Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a philosopher in the 19th century, once asked what we would do if the stars only came out once every 1,000 years. No one would sleep that night, of course. The world would become religious overnight. We would be ecstatic, delirious, made rapturous by the glory of God. Instead, the stars come out every night and we watch television. Because of the cross, because of Easter, We can have communion with the living God in every moment of every day. Yet we watch television. And that is the biggest challenge to me today. So, thank you.